Hello, everyone. Welcome to another edition of Innovation Tech Talks. I'm your host, Joe Toppe, Managing Editor of Innovation and Tech Today. Today, we have a really exciting guest considering we're hitting the NFL playoffs right now. It's Merril Hoge, former ESPN analyst, and of course, Pittsburgh Steeler fullback. That's how I remember Merril. How are you today, Merril?
Joe, I'm great, brother. Fantastic.
That's good. Go ahead. I'm sorry, I didn't hear you there.
I said, I'm fantastic, baby.
That's good. Where are you in the world today, Merril?
Actually, I'm in my home office in Cincinnati/Kentucky area.
I'm originally from Seymour, Indiana, which
Okay.
is about 90 miles west of Cincy.
Yeah.
John Mellencamp's from that town, small town. My mom went to high school with him, but I'm very familiar with that area. Um, Tried to get a job as a college teacher there for a while with the Bearcats, but it didn't work out. But anyways, let's jump into this. So, since leaving the NFL, and obviously your job as an ESPN analyst, what's been keeping you busy, Merrill?
Boy, I actually have numerous things that I'm involved with. First of all, I do a lot of motivational speaking, and that has kind of been my third passion I've stumbled into, quite honestly. If you backed up 30 years ago and said, do you think you ever speak in front of people and do that for a living? I would never. Never. I mean, getting in front of people and speaking was not something that I was a fan of, but I am passionate about it. I'm working on building an app, a concussion app, where
Oh, wow.
you give the app actually encompasses everything, helping people put together protocols to identify head trauma, the removal and valuation of that person in the environment. And I use environment because this is a misconception. People think head trauma just happens in sports, and that's because you just see it everywhere. When the reality is the leading cause of head trauma in the entire country is tripping and falling. Sports doesn't even come close. Sports isn't even in the top three, you know.
Really?
Yeah. So tripping and falling, objects, car accidents, those lead the categories of head trauma. So being able to identify head trauma is most important, because if you don't identify it and remove somebody from that environment, well, you surely can't evaluate or care.
Sure.
So then the next step would be evaluating. Do you return the person back to their environment, or do they go to treatment? And then the type of treatment they get needs to be the proper kind of care. And there's so many good treatments, and there's so many different ways to handle head trauma, because head trauma is so different. So this app will encompass all of that in the process. So it's been a daunting task, but one that's we're almost concluded with it. And then I do the way to play program for the National Football League, and I do some social stuff and platform TV work for the Steelers as well.
So where are some of the places in the country you get to speak? Who are the groups you're talking to? It sounds like you're doing a great deal more than talking to ex-pro football players or athletes, and it sounds
Right.
like you're talking to everyday folks about these things.
Yeah. Well, really, the large audience is really kind of corporate America, but I do a lot with sports, a lot of the sports arena, charities as well. But last year obviously that got depleted come March, but
Sure.
it started to pick up. I'm in January here. I'm leaving here in a week to speak to BMW in Naples, Florida. So, it's kind of the start of a lot of speaking events I've got lined up thus far this year. So it started to pick back up and going back into that direction of being there versus virtual, which, I think virtual was kind of like, okay, it was a great alternative, but at the end of the day, it's not the same as being there. So
Now,
being there, being in person.
humans were meant to be near one another, be in
That's right.
contact with one
Interaction
another.
and those type of things are critical. Not just they're for me, they're critical for me too, not just the people I'm presenting to, but myself. It's important.
So I'm interested, what is some of the feedback you get from the people you speak to, who've been where you've been with having injuries like that? And what are some of the most common ways? You said tripping and falling, not sports.
Well, first of all, I think a lot of people, just lack awareness and education information. First of all, just the actual care that's available today
Sure.
and the treatments that are available. Most people don't know about that. They're unaware of the incredible. First of all, let's go back to the beginning of it, the identifying process. Some people don't even know how to put those in place and execute them. So that's the first start that you help people with. Then the evaluation process, and then do they move into care, or can they return back to the environment? Most people don't know that process. And then let's get to care. Care is really something that people should be hopeful about, inspired by, because head trauma can have in a variety of ways, and symptoms can be abundant. And there's non-medicated, non-invasive ways of helping people too, which is another part that we are educating people with the app. It's not getting on medication. It's a real proactive approach. And I've seen so many people benefit from it, from my own son to colleagues, John Saunders. I don't know if you remember him.
Oh yeah, sure. Yeah.
Well, he dealt with head trauma for years by tripping and falling in a studio,
Really?
and it wasn't really till I was able to get him to the right people and he
Wow.
got the right treatment that he got cleared up. And I remember I told him, I said, listen, at one day the fog will clear. I don't know when that is, but the fog's going to clear. And it was months later. I remember he was going over the Walt Whitman Bridge when he called me in New York, and he's like, the fog cleared, and it was just so to help people and realize there are things available. And the more we do that, really the better and safer all environments can be if you put that into action.
Okay, that's a great story there. So let's switch gears just a little bit and talk a little bit more about the NFL. So I'm curious to know what's your take on the current state of the NFL, considering COVID and also the political venue it's become for folks. Obviously, COVID is changing the way we attend games, watch games, and it also brings to light future pandemics. What will that mean down the road? But what is your take on the current state of the NFL?
Well, I think how they handled it was incredible. I think most people, if you at the beginning of the season, I guarantee you, bet you, in all honesty, most people would have said, I didn't think they'd finish. I actually did anticipate this type of thing happening as the season moved on. You would see more fans, and then the Super Bowl, we'd have more fans. And because it's going to be in Florida, that still looks like that'll be the case. What nobody could predict is all of the different turns in the road that were going to happen for every team. The Steelers had a ton of it. Titans had a ton. Every team impacted them at some point.
Sure.
But my first book was Find a Way. My life journey has been about finding a way. And like 2020 was a find a way year for everybody, because find a way is about something you're faced with and you clearly don't know how to handle it. You don't know which way to take, but you got to do something, and you got to find a way through that process somehow, some way, whether it's, you take a different approach, you look at things differently, you look outside the scope of things, versus doing nothing. Taking action has always been what those words have inspired in my life, whether they're a goal, a dream, or an obstacle. And I think everybody almost in the world had to live a find a way year through 2020.
Yeah, well said, Merril. And on the other side of that question, the NFL now is also kind of a political stage for a lot of folks, and even athletes. I'm wondering, is a lot of people argue it's not the place for it. How do you feel about that? I mean, at the end of the day, these are all private citizens who are voters,
right?
Work just like you and I have political views. And if I were to go in my front yard and start telling people, I mean, I could post Biden or Trump in the front. I'm allowed to do that. Why is it such a, I guess, faux pas in the sporting world?
Well, I think people go watch sports to watch sports.
Escape.
They got a bunch of other channels if they want to listen to that garbage. And I get from a personal perspective, when I played for the Steelers, I go back to what the Rooneys, one of our first conversations I ever had as a rookie, which I was actually blown away by. I was expecting football. And it was how we need to be fibers of the community. We need to go back and help and serve and be a part of our community. That's why the Steelers Nation is so powerful, quite honestly, because of that. Now, that being said, that stuff we do in the off season, or our time off, I always thought, like, focus on during the season inside the white lines and let that be that way. And then do your work out of that, your work later when you're outside the white lines, so I don't think it's a time to make, if I'm still playing, I'm not making my political statements during football. That is not what I'm there to do. That is not what I believe the stage is for. That stage gives me opportunities outside that arena to go do it. And that's how I would conduct it. And that's how I've always actually conducted it, and then, you don't interfere with those people who come to watch a football game.
At one time in America, it seemed that asking who you voted for was just as, I guess, obtrusive as asking how much money you made. And to a certain degree, keeping that, that in the street, that objectivity in the street of I'm just an American in the street, I'm a politician or whatever in the voting booth by myself could keep the streets a little more sane than they are today. Am I right?
Well, that's right. Listen, here's how I view that perspective, and whatever, but anybody may have on that perspective. I always ask people, can you walk on water? Well, if you can't walk on water, here's what you should do. And this is what I remember a decade ago, I put it up on my board, my goal board, is I take care of my backyard. I have enough things to worry about my own life, the own things to work on, than to worry about somebody else's. And therefore, I don't want that put on me. I don't want somebody else judging me with maybe zero information, and they assess their evaluation, which is it's just being poor. It's being poor as a human being to do stuff like that, is when you start judging and evaluating with zero information, or whatever little information you now think you have all the information.
Sure.
So I've really tried to practice that. I know this. I don't even attempt to try to walk on water, because I know exactly where I'm going.
The bottom.
The bottom. I'm going there fast. So
with the rest of us, man,
perspective, and I try to just be the best I can be, and continue to evolve as a person and business, as a family guy. Those things keep me busy. My mind doesn't wander. I think the word peace, if everybody wants peace in their life, what is peace really? It's freedom of conflict. And when you start wandering into other people's arenas, you create conflict. You can't have peace when you're sitting there trying to change other people and point at other people. And I call that a losing locker room, a toxic locker room. When you point fingers, cast blame, make excuses, I can promise you there's never been a person that garners success when that is their recipe and the environment they live in. However, if you're in the successful locker room, first thing a successful person always does, self-evaluate. Look at themselves, create corrections, create a different plan, and then take action on their circumstances. There you garner success. And I've really tried to practice that. In my messaging, when I talk about that, and I'm a product of so many people who have helped me do that. So, I share messages and stories about that, and I just try to exercise that every day the best I can.
Back on the game, Merril, to the NFL, in addition to, growing as a political stage or how it's evolved with COVID, at the same time, technology involving protection of the game has changed a great deal since you were on the field. And so I'm wondering, how do you view that from the outside, especially with your personal experiences and injury? And, having been a professional football player, do you see that the padding, the technology is progressing in the right way, and that the players out there are more protected today?
Well, I don't think there's any doubt. I mean, it's a much better environment than when I played. And I'm part of making that environment better. And that's ultimately what you can be at now. A lot of players get angry and frustrated. Geez, we didn't make, I could sit there and go back and go, what I would make now if I played? Okay, well, that'd be like the Pilgrims being, you doing an interview with the Pilgrim, and they're sitting here complaining because they didn't have planes, trains, and automobiles when they went across the prairie. Well, the first people feel like, well, they didn't have that. So that's a waste of time and energy.
Sure.
How you look at it is you help make it better for the people behind you, which is what you like to do. As a parent, you want your kids better than you are, and you try to break chains and not pass things on and help them in that process. And so I'm excited for where a player is today. I remember when I signed with the Chicago Bears, I made $1 million a year. Now, when I went back and looked at when Walter Payton finished playing, which was 1987, I believe it was his last year of his career, because
Yes.
my rookie year.
Yeah.
He was the highest paid player in the NFL at $1 million. So I start thinking, I'm like, you think Walter Payton would be making $1 million right now? When I went to Chicago, he'd be making like 20 million. So anybody can do that at any given time. And, that's why being respectful of people who the history of stuff and building on that, is I think an important thing to keep perspective of where you are and what you have.
I have to ask, if you were wearing the protection they're provided today when you were playing, would you have had some of the concussions or injuries that you suffered?
Clearly could have. See, equipment's not going to prevent that. And what happened to me in my career is improper care. That's completely different, and it's misunderstood. My career didn't end because of head trauma. Because if that would have been the case, the Monday night game when I sustained my major head trauma, I would never played again. I did not. I was actually practicing 5 days later. Therein comes where the improper care came into place. So now when you put that into perspective, the protocols and that are applied, that are part of today's game that weren't a part of there, but they were starting with the Steelers, those are in abundance. I sat on the committee with the National Football League on the return to play for our players. That's how we came up with the tent, because part of our discussion was like, I'm on the sideline getting a question from you, Doc, and you're asking me what's the score. I can use a scoreboard. Okay, I can use some things to cheat. I can't handle answering questions with the emotions of the game going on. If a turnover happens, I'm not paying attention to you. I'm going to go back and play. So that's really why the tent was brought, is that you can bring peace to the player. You can bring them out of the environment a little bit. Then based on how that goes, you can either come back out or you go to the locker room, those stages. So the protocols that are in place today, what the steps are to evaluate the player and make sure they're okay. That's what's the best thing about not just the NFL. It should be about every sport, because every sport can have head trauma, and even in your homes, that kind of thing can be applied. That's why I go back to that app. This app will give you those resources, information, and that guideline to help you through that process. So you do the best thing for your family members or the person in an environment that had head trauma.
Before we take a quick break, Merril, I have to ask, is the game today too violent?
Well, it depends on how you define violence. I mean, it's a physical game. I mean, that's part of the beauty of it. That's what I loved about it. I remember as a kid, I was actually probably best at baseball. I was best at baseball. I really loved baseball, and I was good at basketball. But man, like, what was it in football? What was it in football? It was just the contact of it.
Yeah.
I like the physical contact of playing that sport. And listen, it's not for everybody, but it is for millions. I mean, I remember my son was kind of the same way. I tried to get him to all sports because I never got an experience on golf. So I was like, I'm going to make sure Bo has every sport he gets to touch a little bit. And I'm just telling you, by the time he was 7, I could tell. I was like, this kid loves football. He just loves fun. There's nothing I could do about that. And it's his makeup. And listen, I coached thousands of kids over from 1991 to my last stint here just a couple of years ago with Your Call Football, where we started a pro league where fans called our plays. Like, you see the passion in people who love to play the game. So we don't want to take the game from them. There's no reason to take the game from them. There is no scientific evidence whatsoever that says football is going to cause A, B, or C. Zero, as far as head trauma and cognitive behavior. Zero. People say that, but nobody asks them the question, well, then show me the information, the evidence that proves that. And then you're going to get, and they start dancing around things, or they'll send you some piece of garbage that's not scientific. That being said, we make the game the best we can. I've always talked to parents. There's been times when kids are sitting there stretching. I'm getting ready for the season. I can tell he doesn't want to be there. I ask him, do you want to be here? No. Well, what do you like doing? And he'd give me a list of things. So I talked to mom and dad, and they're like, well, he doesn't want to be here. I'm like, I know, we brought him because of you. And I'm like, no, my job's already hard enough. It's okay. He doesn't like it. He likes other things. So be grateful for that. So feed that passion. But football's not for everybody, but it is for millions. And the environment that exists today is the best and safest we have ever seen it in the history of the sport. Really, all sports should be like that, as long as the protocols for head trauma are being applied.
Well, you heard it here first, guys, from Merril Hoge, straight from him. I appreciate that. All right, we'll be back in just a few minutes after hearing a word from our sponsors with Merril Hoge.
Today's episode of Innovation Tech Talks is brought to you by OMRON. OMRON is a world leader in technology designed to solve social issues, improve lives, and build a better tomorrow. They serve a range of industries which utilize their technologies to innovate and grow factory automation, healthcare, mobility, and energy management. In the industrial automation business, OMRON technology demonstrates the power of machines to unleash human potential, pursuing the ideal in automation, in which people and machines are working together in harmony. OMRON provides sensing, control, safety, vision, motion, and robotics technologies for the automotive, food and beverage packaging, semiconductor, electronics, life sciences, and infrastructure industries. For over 80 years, OMRON has helped industrial businesses maximize potential by solving problems with creativity. Learn more, go to automation.omron.com.
All right, we were back here with Merril Hoge, talking to him about everything from technology in the NFL to the current state of the game. we picked up, or we left off on where the game was too violent. We're going to follow up on COVID impacting the NFL playoffs, as you were talking about earlier, Merril. This is the time when, it's a fans game. The fans want to be there. As you pointed out, the Super Bowl is going to be played in Florida, so we're likely to get a little bit more fan base. But I'm curious how this will impact the playoffs and in future games as well.
Well, that's really hard to predict, because of what has already taken place, just in this year. If you try to predict something, you're going to probably be dead wrong. So, I think just being equipped to handle what comes your way and be able to shift and change. And you said something there I want to kind of go back to when you talk
Sure.
about technology. Something I don't want to be left out of this, because or just dismissed, if you will. The equipment that exists today is incredible. Okay. The helmet alone is 100% better than it was 10 years ago. So just go back to 50 years ago. So helmet technology, equipment technology, the techniques in how they demand you play the game, that has significantly helped the environment of all sports, that do those things correctly. But that doesn't mean you're going to eliminate head trauma. It's just not. But those things have been significant in helping reduce them, and minimize them. And they're a vital component of the improvements of the game of football.
There's just certain risk with anything that you do in life, whether it's a sporting endeavor, a working endeavor, walking to the bathroom at night, right? I mean, you're going to take risks.
Listen, I was recently here. My FedEx and UPS. I don't know who comes here more, but UPS guy gets out. He's limping, and I was like, "Oh my gosh, you hurt your knee?" He's like, "No, gotta get a new hip." I go, "What?" I go, "What from what?" He's like, "Oh, in and out of that truck for 10 years." He goes, "My hips wore," and I'm like, So that truck and you doing your job caused that hip issue. Now, if you hear that in football, like, "Oh, it's dangerous. Look at all the things that could happen." I go, "Shoot, they would be shutting down UPS drivers because you're going to have a hip problem for doing that." Shoot, 2 days later, my UPS, the FedEx guy comes. He comes limping out. I said, "Oh, I got a bad hip." He goes, "No, I got a bad knee." But he'd had a bad knee and he'd been like 15 years going in and out, in and out, in and
Sure.
out. So, listen, I mean, here's what I do know. No matter how you want to look at it or deny it, okay, everybody's one step closer to heaven every day. Okay?
Well said.
Regardless of when that might be, we all are a day closer, a step closer. Now, do you want to live your life in fear? Well, that is your choice. Go ahead and do it. But don't pawn that fear on people, especially if you're uneducated and uninformed. I think the best way to handle any environment that you want to thrive in, learn about it, create the best environment you can be, and then enjoy it. Go enjoy it. Don't rob people of it, especially if you're abusing things and misusing things to create fear. When you start doing that, that's deplorable and harmful to people.
I think when I think about what the NFL had to do in reaction and response of technologies to COVID-19, for example, all the Zoom meetings we've done this year, Zoom is blown up, Google Meet, all of these things. I think about what 9/11 did to standards and protocol after, for flying. People who didn't fly before 2001, we did it a certain way. You remember, Merril.
Oh, yeah.
And now everybody, my kids go with me, get on an airplane. They have no idea while we're taking off our belts and our shoes and we're going through safety the way that we do as opposed to, years before. But certain things like 9/11 or COVID-19 not only impact the current market, they leave about residual standards to ensure those things don't happen again. And obviously, the world is a global society. There's airplanes flying around it every day, bringing people everywhere. And unfortunately, there's not a global health standard. So as a result, these kinds of things can happen. My question is, what will the NFL do in the future? The NFL is comprised of large stadiums, huge gatherings. It relies on that to pay its players, to keep the games going. What kind of residual standards and protocol are we going to see? And, Hollywood is reconsidering how they go watch movies.
Well, I can't really answer that, in the sense of, what will happen to the large gatherings. I think everybody would envision and hope that, listen, you can go to an arena of 65,000 people, will there be some different protocols? I mean, and some of it actually is really something that's been around forever and common sense when you think of just standard hygiene and respect. For example, if you're sick, stay home. Don't go to the workplace or don't go out while you're sick. I mean, rather, no matter what the illness is you have,
No kidding.
virus,
No kidding.
that's just not being respectful for people.
Yeah, I never wanted anybody with a cold or a flu anywhere near me. Get away, get away.
If it changed that, what's wrong with that? That if you became
Sure.
a little more respectful for and personal hygiene, you paid more attention to taking care of yourself, your hands, not putting your hands up around your face. And if you're sick, stay home. If it enhanced that, if there was, more sanitizers when you walked in, I mean, I can see fallouts like that. I don't see people being robbed of being able to gather. Eventually, I just don't think that happens. But
I don't think the human beings or the human spirit would ever allow something like that for the long term. I mean,
right. At some point, you need that, and you get frustrated by not having that. Now, how do you go about it in the safest environment? And listen, when you think of people who have compromising health, well, that's their responsibility to stay home. It's not my responsibility to know that when I walk out. Okay, when we leave the front door of our home, then that's on you. It's not on me. But if you have compromising health, then you have a responsibility to stay home. That's not my responsibility to know you have compromising health.
I know some organizations where there are large groupings or events, they're considering spacing between seating. Obviously, with the NFL, that would mean a complete reconstruction of so many existing, multi-million to billion-dollar facilities. I mean, that seems impossible. So I tend to agree with you. I think that down the road, at the very least, because it's done it for me, it's enhanced the need. Let's wash my hands again. Let's do this. Let's do those kinds of things. Be very self-aware of what you're touching and what you're doing. And at the same time, I think that there'll probably be sanitation, facilities more accessible, whether it's just those, like now when you go into a Planet Fitness, there's hand sanitizer stations between everything. So maybe something.
Really, what's wrong? I mean, what's wrong with that if that ends up being, you enhance the hygiene aspect so that you don't, transfer any type of sickness you might have, cold, any kind of flu or whatever it is. So,
or if you just go to the restroom and then you're going to go eat, it's a good thing to get your hands clean.
It's and that shouldn't have been a priority up to now. I mean,
I think it was, Merril.
You would think that would be pretty much a standard, but you're right. It's so kind of mind. You scratch your head when you got people telling you that. Really, they said people need to be told that already. I mean, they don't do that already. It's crazy.
To some degree, closing last few questions here. To some degree, Merril, you'd have to think that the game is such a good game. Football is still such a compelling game. I watched empty stadium games this year. I didn't need to see the fans there. Having said that, it's such a more enriched environment when you're at the game, you're with your boys, you're enjoying some drinks or whatever, having a good time. It's so much more engaging that way. But I guess what I ask you is, it seems to be a game that could last without the fan base. Can it?
Well, it just proved it can.
Yeah, I guess it could.
But I think that, the ambiance of fans, it's that completes it. Okay. It still was missing something. It was still missing something. I watched it too, but it was missing something, and when you see games you saw, whether it was college or the NFL that had, a third of the fans there, man, just that third mattered and it made a difference, so
it's not just me. I'm sorry, go ahead. I'm sorry, go ahead, Merril.
Let's just hope it gets back to that, if there's some enhanced protocols that make it better and a little safer from getting any type of cold or flu that somebody that chose to go to the game, and let's go back to that. If you do, stay home. Then I think we get back to an environment where we can go to a game with large crowds there.
To me, even part of the television experience, not just being there, is also like, I couldn't tell you how many games I watched rooting for my hometown Indianapolis Colts to beat the Pittsburgh Steelers, particularly those games in the mid-90s with Harbaugh, those few playoff games we made, and seeing those terrible towels, just all the windmills or watching the games in Cleveland. I'm interested in seeing the shots of the dog pound up there, or the games in Denver when she rides the horse up and down the sideline after a touchdown. It's all part of it there or on television for me.
Yeah, no, I agree. There's, like I said, there's something missing there, and hopefully that can come back, as we move forward, is there going to be maybe some added things to help it? Well, let's hope they are, those things, but we can get back to those type of things that a lot of millions of people enjoy.
Well, Merril, we couldn't get out of this interview with you without asking one final question of the year, or of this interview, I should say. Who's winning the Super Bowl and why?
Well, let me just tell you this. I tell people, okay, let's use the Pittsburgh-Cleveland game. Pittsburgh was the better team going into that matchup, but that's exactly why you play it, okay? The better team didn't win. The team that played better did. So who can play better on their given day? Listen, I think the Kansas City Chiefs are still the best team. Are they clearly the best team and nobody can touch them? Absolutely not. There's a few teams I think can clearly derail them in the AFC. That's Buffalo and Baltimore. I don't think there's any doubt that would be a great matchup. But if Kansas City happens to be on and they don't have like a 4 to 5 turnover game like the Steelers did, because you can't predict that. And that's the biggest statistical outcome of a game is turnovers that you have. But they don't give you that before the game, so you can't predict it. I still think Kansas City is the team to beat. I think they have a chance to repeat how balanced they are, how many phases they have to their team. They're the team still, I think, to beat and have a chance to win it and repeat.
Who will represent the NFC? Maybe Brady and the Buccaneers. Can they do it?
But you know what? Obviously, that would be that'd be a crazy story.
He's commenced his GOAT status.
And it's been done where wild card goes on the road and does it. Shoot, the Steelers did it and won it. It can be done.
2005 Steelers, right?
Right. So they can do that. I think your Colts experienced some of that run. I didn't want to bring that up, but anyway, they brought it. We'll move on. But that's really 3 good teams. When you look at them, obviously the Bucs, and when you look at the Saints and then the Packers, it'll be hard to beat. It'd be hard now. Going back to what we're talking about, it would be harder to beat the Packers in Lambeau with that fan base.
Yes,
but the weather element is still part of that.
Oh, sure, sure.
So when you have a dome team and a warm team that has to go to a cold team, that does have a factor to do with the little. Brady's used to that though. That wouldn't phase him. He's done that so many times. But when you've played all year in warm climate, man, it's like when you walk out in that cold. That's why in December, when I look at our schedule and when I'm in Pittsburgh or Chicago and I see somewhere south, I'm like, I can't wait. That's not an advantage for them in December. That is a disadvantage for the South teams because they've got warm weather. We can't wait to get to it. So,
yeah, I bet it fires.
But I think Green Bay, it'll be hard to beat Green Bay root them out of their home field advantage.
All right. So Merril Hoge predicts Kansas City, Green Bay in the Super Bowl. And if Kansas City plays like Kansas City, it's a Chiefs victory.
It's a Chiefs victory with the repeat.
Merril, I thank you so much for joining us today. It was a great interview and great for you to finally talk to an old friend because I've known you for 35 years, as I pointed out.
I know, Joe, finally got together, brother. I sure appreciate it.
Finally got to talk. Take care, brother.
Thanks, Joe.